Let me first ask a basic question. How many people who knows what Keysight Technologies is? Yeah, I like that. One of the benefits of sponsoring the Senior Design Day. So I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate all the hard work that I know most of you, if not all of you, have put into your projects. And you know, obviously the end goal for all of that is to ultimately, thanks Rich, land that job that you ultimately want that kicks off and starts your career, right? I mean, that's what's really all about. That's why you're putting all of this effort in to doing something that I would say is very cool. You know, I tell some people that I'm more on the sunset of my career rather than the sunrise. And so, you know, I'm just excited to see so many faces here and the energy that so many of you bring to the equation. But I have to say that as much as so many of you put so much hard work into things, the most critical aspect of getting a job is the technical job interview, right? I mean, you're studying to be engineers or scientists, as the case may be. I've done this to very broad audiences as well as some very focused ones. And the technical interview is one that, how do I want to say, is often overlooked in the context of getting that job, and it's usually in the technical interview that will either make or break your success in getting a job with that particular company, right? I can't tell you how many times, now that I've actually done this workshop numerous times, where the students come up to me after the fact and said, I wish I had this last week. Because, you know, the notion there was they failed, they missed the opportunity for the job that they really wanted to be able to get, and so they were kind of disappointed, right? So hopefully most of you haven't had that experience thus far. You haven't missed your technical interview and that job that you really, really wanted. And so this gives you an opportunity of getting that leg up. None of this is, interestingly enough, rocket science, but at the same time, I've seen too many students fail their technical interview, right? So a little bit about myself. Let's see, work for me. I graduated from Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, way back when, in 1980. I also have as an electrical engineer. I also have had my computer science master's in 1985. Back then, we didn't have what we call a computer engineering degree. You know, back then, you kind of had to bake your own, and so that's kind of like what I had to do. And I've been a professional engineer, lots of engineering experience. I've been a recruiter for 5 years, and it's ultimately in those 5 years of looking to hire college graduates, I came up with this seminar, and I have to say, ever since then, this is a kind of high demand topic for me. And so, because too many, like I said, students fail. I love your career centers. Career centers do a fantastic job. They will help you do things like resumes and cover letter writing. I have to tell you that as a recruiter type person and a hiring manager, there's two different types. There's the recruiter and there's a hiring manager. Any idea what the difference might be?
One actually interviews, the other one is just trying to get a large group of people.
Exactly right. The recruiter is, you know, that's that first bar you kind of have to get over. It's generally pretty low. You're not going to get a technical question from them, right? Whereas the hiring manager is ultimately the one that you're probably going to go work for, right? And so they have a much stronger, much vested interest in that. And so I was both, right? I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people. You know, the position I had open wasn't always all the positions that were available at Keysight Technologies, right? So, so the recruiter is very broad in nature, whereas you get into your hiring manager is very specific, right? So, so I'm bringing all of that experience to me, and many of the quotes that you will hear me say are direct quotes from, unfortunately, too many students. So with that, I want to kind of get into this. So the last thing I'll say about this is I can tell very quickly, very easily, when a student has actually used the services of the Career Center or not, right? I can tell almost instantly. From how they dress, to how they answer questions, to how well they interview, to how great their resume looks or not looks. So if you haven't used your Career Center for all of those reasons up there, you're doing yourself a disservice. So, you know, if you will, career centers do a great job, but where they do indeed fall short most of the time, and most of them will tell you this, is I can't help them with the technical interview as an engineer. Right? They don't know electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. They don't understand all those things. They focus more on the soft skills of things. And so, all very, very important, because I'll tell you, if you're a guy, okay, and your tie doesn't look good, you know, if you have button-down collars and you don't button them down and you have them flapping in the wind, all of that makes an impression on the interviewers, right? Even the recruiters. Ladies, the same sort of fashion statements, I'll say, apply to you as well, right? So, the job market is pretty competitive. In fact, it's kind of interesting right now. The best jobs, I think, are the ones that receive the most competition, right? So it's a global economy out there. Unemployment rate is, I like to say, is not necessarily the best indicator right now. It's the lowest it's been in history. But you got to understand what the data represents. The data represents the fact that how many people are unemployed. It doesn't necessarily represent how many people are underemployed, right? And underemployment is probably a bigger problem in the country these days than not, right? Because you get a lot of graduate people who are working in Walmart that should be working in an engineering firm somewhere, right? So you have to be aware of that. So there are hundreds of candidates for every opening. I mean, I think that's the bottom line when you look at it. When your resume comes across a hiring manager's desk, it's not the only one. In fact, it's not even paper anymore, it's all electronic. So one of the tips I'll have for you, and hopefully your career centers are telling you this, is when you go online and you're pasting your resume into some web page somewhere, keep it simple. Right? Don't use a lot of fancy fonts or bullets or any of those kinds of things, because more often than not, that gets jumbled up and scrambled. And if I can't even discern an email address out of that mess, your resume's toast, right? It doesn't go anywhere. So realize that simple is best when it comes down to actually cutting and pasting your resume into some web page that you're applying for a job opening for. And you know, I have quite a few quotes scattered through this, because these tend to represent a lot of what I would consider my career wisdom in some respects. Jim Collins, anybody know who Jim Collins is? He's an author in this particular case, so I'll give you that much. He wrote a book called Good to Great. Excellent book. Definitely something that I would recommend reading. It says people are not your most important asset, the right people are. The big gist about his book is getting the right people in the right seats, and he kind of uses this bus analogy and so on and so forth, right? But you got to know who's going to be driving the bus, who's going to be, you know, and all the different aspects. But you know, people are important assets, yes, but the right people are the most important. And that's what we are looking for as a hiring manager. One of the things I'll also say is hiring managers are, if you will, your biggest fan, right? We're rooting for you. Right? We want you to win. I mean, too often I think the stereotype of the hiring manager, he's the guy that you have to get past, or the gal you have to get past, right? And they're going to be the toughest person on you, and so on and so forth. I'm rooting for you. I want you to succeed. I want you to win. Why? Because when I hire the best person, when I get that right person on the team, I can move on to my normal day job. I can be done with hiring, and I can get back to the business of doing whatever it is my business is. And so, you know, I'm rooting for you. I really, really want you to succeed. The reason why you're in a face-to-face interview is because you passed all the other steps. I like 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I've read that book. If you haven't, I recommend that you do, right? I'll tell you, these aren't the steps. Even though I think that's the underlying, I think it's the underlying goal that we all want, right? Is to make money, make some more money, make more money, right? I mean, we want to get there. Read steps 1 through 7. That's not what the 7 habits are. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Steve Covey, he says, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, first things first. And these are all of the habits there. And part of the reason why you're here is because you're doing the first step. right? You're doing that first step. You're being proactive. You're taking a step to say, I need to know something more about this. I need to go out and understand what does it mean to be involved with a technical interview. Those who aren't here might be because they have to be out there, but I've done this often enough on campus where, you know, I can tell that you are setting yourself apart from everybody else because you are here, because you are being proactive, right? And we'll talk about some of these others as I go through my presentation. But there's a quote from Stephen Covey, and it says, dependent people need others to get what they want. Independent people get what they want through their own efforts. Interdependent people combine their own efforts with efforts of others to achieve their greatest success. And I will say, after 35 some years of being in industry, in my career, that part about being interdependent is probably, that's again, another huge piece of wisdom. You know, we don't get our jobs done alone anymore, right? It's always a part of a team, and it being a part of a team that's going to be very important to getting anything done going forward again. And unfortunately, the challenge is those teams aren't always in the same building anymore, right? They're not even in the same state or country anymore, right? I mean, most of the time we're actually dealing interculturally with the teams that we're working on, right? Most electronic manufacturers today have their electronic manufacturing done in Asia somewhere, right? So you now become part of a very global team very, very quickly. So those are the habits. I'm just going to spin it. We must make our habits, and then our habits make us. Right? I think that's the key. You know, there's another. I forget what this term is called, but you know, it says you can't feel your way into acting. You have to act your way into feeling. It's the same sort of thing. We first have to make our habits, and then our habits make us. Right? And so, Stephen Covey's habits of highly effective people. I recommend that you go down that pace. So what I've done is I've done this technical interview, and so the top 7 list, I'd like to say that my banner across the top here will give you some indication of whether you're talking about a way to fail or a way to succeed, right? So this is my first way of suggesting that this is my tip number 7, the top 7 list of how to succeed, right? Now, how to succeed is coming back to Stephen Covey's habits, and it's to begin with the end in mind, right? So the question, my batteries must be going a little bit. What is the end in mind that you have in mind? What's the end that you have in mind? You're getting a degree right now. What's the end that you have in mind to get the degree? Is it more than that? Comments? Yeah, we can be a little interactive here. I want to keep you alive a little bit.
Obviously, finding a good career.
Finding a good career, yeah, okay.
Goals retiring with lots of money.
Well, that's a good end goal, right? That's a little bit more in the future. I want something a little bit more present, right? I often hear things like, well, I want to make a difference in the world, right? I want to make a difference. I want to know that the work I'm doing is meaningful, right? I want to know that I'm more about being green, for instance, right? I want to be in that kind of company, right? So those start becoming a little bit more near term as those things that you won't want to begin with that in your mind. But I'll say, you know, what is it that you want to do with your degree? You know, it's just like, you know, bottom line is I want to find a job, right? Right? It's not just find a job, right? Okay, there's that's a little bit, you basically want to get a job, right? You want to get that job, right? So, successful individual typically sets his next goal somewhat, but not too much above his last achievement. In this way, he steadily raises his level of aspiration. And there's another book I remember reading, it's called The Fifth Discipline. In that book, what I loved about it was setting a vision for yourself, right? Your vision is always, as this tends to imply, somewhat above where you're at, but not unachievable, right? It causes you to stretch yourself, right? In fact, the image that he kind of put it is that your reality is down here, your vision is up here, and imagine an elastic band holding the two together, and it's going to want to pull those two things together. That's what that statement is really all about. It's about being, always having a goal in mind. So, top 3 ways of failing. So there's my header, right? Here's the banner. Here's hit number, parade number 3 on the list. Number 3 is don't anticipate a technical question. Sounds kind of simple, but I can't tell you how many times I've had people come in and say, if I knew there would be a technical question, I would have studied. Does that sound kind of crazy? Well, I'll tell you, it has happened way too often. I would have studied, right? And I like this one because it kind of represents a certain generational thing there. I'm not trying to be stereotypical here or anything along those lines. But I kind of said, well, who do you think is going to ask the technical question, right? I'll tell you, it's going to be anybody on that team. Right? Any individual there's going to be on the team who's going to be asking those questions. And you know, I like this picture too because it kind of feels like this interrogation of the person, right? And it kind of feels like that creates that adversarial kind of feeling that I was kind of referring to. But we're all rooting for you. On that side of the table, we're all rooting for you because we want to find that best person. And we want you to succeed. We want you to shine in all of that, right? But I will also say that I would also like it to be a dialogue, right? It's always a dialogue. And so if you get a technical question, ask a bunch of questions to go along with it, if it makes sense, of course. But I mean, ask questions and kind of get the feeling for what's going on. Because half the problem that we try and solve in trying to assess a person's skills is how they think, right? And if you don't, quote, expose that to us as a hiring manager, you're leaving us in the dark. And then it's kind of like showing your work on your exam, right? If you only blurt out the answer, right, and the answer is wrong, I can't tell if you just messed up somewhere slightly along the way, or you were way off base and you were totally clueless, right? But if you expose some of your thinking, that goes a long way in understanding who you are as an individual and how you think, right? So how do you get past that, right? So what are some of the ways that you say, okay, so you know, don't get caught off guard. It sounds kind of crazy, but just know to always expect a technical question, right? A lot of times what happens for me is I will see your resume come across my screen, and I will say, oh, that's a guy I want to talk to. I pick up the phone and I give you the guy a call, right? And I say, hey, Bob, how are you today? I'm glad I caught you. You have some time right now? What would your answer be?
Absolutely.
You think that's the best answer?
I know it's a
It's
answer.
a answer. Okay, I like that. It is a answer, right? Any other thoughts? I saw your head shaking in another way.
I would tell them now's not a good time next week and then spend that whole week.
Well, I'll tell you, as a hiring manager, I don't expect that you have the time right now. In fact, it's to your advantage to say, can we schedule that? I'm going to be available at such and such a time. Yes, what you're going to need to do, because this is another problem I've had, and it's not in my top 10 list, is they don't even remember what job they applied to. Right? You chuckle, but I mean, I get too many people who spam every job opening they've got. And then you go in there and you say, well, and they don't know. So at the very least, what you want to do is go back to your desk or computer or whatever it is, and you say, okay, he was with Keysight Technologies. What job did I apply to at Keysight Technologies, right? And you go, and they say, oh, okay, I remember now. And you go through all of that stuff, and you re-familiarize yourself with who the company is, what the job was, what kind of products they make, and so on and so forth, right? And so always research the technical aspects of the company's products and services, right? Always get to know who we are as the company that you want to now go to work for, right? Now, if spam does, you know, and just say, hey, I'm just going to throw the spaghetti against the wall and figure out what sticks, then it sounds like that will ultimately come out in the interview anyway, right? Somewhere along the line, right? So we like in interviewing people who have an interest in what we're doing in our products. Every company does, right? That's the reason why we're in business, right? So always research the technical aspects. You guys have a tremendous advantage over the time when I used to have to go off and do this because the internet is just super fantastic, right? So use the internet, expand your knowledge. And be prepared to ask relevant technical questions. I think that's the other aspect about this. This is kind of like that dialogue piece I was referring to. You know, it might not be super technical, but if you're going, say, for a computer engineering job, you might ask, what programming languages do you use in the development of your product? Right? It might be that you have C++ and Python and a whole bunch of other stuff on your resume, and you say, well, okay, but is that what overlaps with what they want? Get involved with those dialogues. Have those kinds of questions available. Right? We love those kinds of things, right? And yes, there are dumb questions. There are some very dumb questions. The one that I like using is, you know, somewhere along the line, if you've never asked any questions, the interviewers will say, well, do you have any questions for us? Right? And us is usually the case, because there's usually 2 or 3 people there. And I just remember this one person kind of pausing, looked at the 3 of us who were in the room, and I have an Asian counterpart that was with me that day. He says, you look Asian. Is there any good Chinese restaurants around here? Okay, that qualifies. That qualifies as a dumb question. Needless to say, he didn't. You know, there was lots of reasons why he didn't get the job, and maybe he knew that, but ultimately that's what was happening. So now here's a you know, Tom Watson. I think that is you know, Graham Bell's guy there. The ability to ask the right questions is more than half the battle of finding the right answer. Right? So be intelligent about your questions. So what hopefully you're starting to get out of this is, you know, you got to put a little effort into knowing the company that you're going to interview with, the company that you're going to apply a job for. Right? You got to understand a little about who they are so that you can indeed ask the right questions. Right? I love this. This is Arthur Ashe quote. I'm sure that other people have used it in a variety of different flavors. But it's always start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Right? You can't do everything, but you're just going to know that you got to be going forward. So, okay, so we got now 3 reasons or 3 things that we can do to hopefully succeed. Here's the number 2 way that most people fail their technical interview. Can't explain the topic on your resume. This has to be one of the most frustrating things that I have ever encountered in the context of interviewing people, right? Yeah, this was just a cute little thing there. I like this. Yeah, I can't remember what movie. I kind of pulled this clip off the line, but it's just don't show them that deer in the headlights look. Right? And that's what it looks like. I couldn't believe it. I mean, you get the eyes shifting back and forth, the mouth kind of opens up, and you're just like, I don't know how to answer that question, right? It's that deer in the headlights kind of look, right? But just realize, the first thing I am reading as a hiring manager is your resume. Where do you think the first set of questions are going to come from? Your resume, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've had people not even be able to answer questions off their resume. So know what you've done. It sounds kind of simple. It sounds kind of crazy. But my comment about working in teams, one of the ways that I hear is you know what your projects well, know what your teammates have done as well. I think that's one of the more important aspects of things, because when you're out working in the team in industry, you are not only needed to all of your expertise for the area that you're providing to that project, but you also have to know how that fits into the big puzzle of everybody wrapped around you, right? What are they responsible for? What is she responsible for? What do they have to do by what time frame? And why are they important to the team? And so all of that comes into together. TLAs. Anybody know what a TLA is? I know that guy in the back knows. TLA, 3-letter acronym. 3-letter acronym, right? There's also FLAs, 4-letter acronyms, 5-letter acronyms. There are all kind of acronyms out there, right? I had to use a TLA to do that, right? But anyways, my daughter was putting together her resume, and I was looking at her resume, and I started doing what I naturally do. I look at her resume and said, well, tell me a little bit about this. And she had one of these TLAs for, she was a chemistry major, and it was a piece of instrumentation that she had on her resume. And I looked at that and I said, well, what is that? And she couldn't answer the question. I said, well, you have two choices. You either take it off your resume, or you go learn how to answer questions about that. She learned how to answer questions about it, right? So she knew what the TLA stood for. She knew the capabilities of the instrumentation because it was important for her in her field of study in chemistry that it made sense to do that. How many electrical engineers are in the room? Okay, fantastic. Okay, if I were to ask you, and now, okay, so that's good. Hopefully you're all familiar with an oscilloscope, yes? How about spectrum analyzers? Okay, so I'm getting some heads nodding, right? So here's a question for you. Can you tell me what the X and Y axis is on an oscilloscope and what the X and Y axis is on a spectrum analyzer? Volts per time, right? And spectrum analyzer? Huh? Spectrum analyzer. I didn't hear what. Something over frequency. I can't hear what the first word you're saying.
Amplitude.
Amplitude. What's amplitude?
Volts per second.
Power.
Yeah.
Power, right? When I see spectrum analyzer, we're a test and measurement company. When I see you put oscilloscope, you put spectrum analyzer resume, I'm going to ask you questions about those instruments, right? I can't tell you how many times who had spectrum analyzer in their resume and they couldn't tell me what the X and Y axis was. I would have at least accepted amplitude over frequency, right? That's relatively close. Some couldn't even tell me voltage over time for an oscilloscope, right? So therein lies the challenge. So no, be able to explain everything. And so that's not just your degrees and the courses, it's anything that you put on your resume, because that's the first thing I'm looking at in order to ask questions of you, right? Can't answer them? So, I mean, even if you've done an internship, and in that internship you were doing a project for somebody else, right? Well, why did that company want you to do that project? Right? I remember asking one gal one time, and I said, well, why did they use this technology over that technology? Oh, they just told me to do it. Right? That's not the kind of answer I want to hear as a hiring manager. Right? You should know why you're doing what you're doing in order to be able to then pull it all together. Being able to explain some of the underlying technologies. Some of us will probably be working with XB type products, right? So maybe using a Zigbee radio in their design, so on and so forth. You got to know what that means. What are some of its limitations? You don't expect you always to be the experts. The other thing that is true too that I want to make mention of here is you're rarely the expert in what the company is an expert in, right? So you might be somebody who, we make oscilloscopes. Nobody in this room is going to be an expert on oscilloscopes. Right? So there is an acknowledgement that when you come to work for any company, for that matter, we don't really expect you to be the expert, because that's part of your overall career development, your continuous education in that space, because ultimately you do indeed become an expert in that area. But there's an element of there's a certain level of expectation that there's a foundation that we're building off of as a hiring manager. Right? We want to know that the foundation is firm, right? We want to know that it's rock solid, not sand, right? So we kind of look at that. So these are the kinds of questions that we tend to ask in order to try and determine, is there a foundation? If you don't know the answer, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It could be either, right? It could be either, simply because a lot of what I'm trying to do is, well, how much depth is there, right? The fact that you don't, so what you don't know, and this is the interesting challenge for as the interview, is where's that bar? What is it that keeps me above the bar versus below the bar, right? If I can't answer one thing out of 30, well, I got more dots above the bar than below the bar. That's not a bad thing. In fact, that's probably not, definitely not a bad thing, right? It's just as, okay, well, that's one area. Because I'm always, as a hiring manager, looking to say, well, where do you need some extra help? right? Because again, as a college grad, we don't expect you to know everything. In fact, we know that there's going to be a lot more climbing that learning curve right out of school than anybody else who has to. But most people feel this kind of scrutiny, right? I mean, you feel like you're placed underneath that magnifying glass, you're sweating bullets like you wouldn't believe. Again, Jim Collins, I love what he does, is his greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. Right? It's how much effort you put into it. Right? So, the last way that people fail their technical interview. You can't explain the fundamentals. Every discipline has a set of fundamentals. And those fundamentals are where most people trip up. I got a whole bunch of charts up here because there's a lot of different kinds of disciplines and expertise here. Everyone should recognize this as Ohm's law, right? Hopefully you do, right? You know, if you're in chemical engineering, you know, the water cycle is probably real important in thermodynamics and all that kind of good stuff. I spent some time in studying metallurgy. My wife was a metallurgist, and so that's a nice little phase diagram. All right. Again, it's amazing to me sometimes when I ask a person, I say, well, can you draw me an exclusive OR gate? And they say, I don't know. And these are people who said they got an A in digital design. Okay? These are the fundamentals, right? And so you got to know your fundamentals, right? I got some more things. I think the mechanical engineers have I don't know, any mechanical engineers in the room here today? No? Okay. Mechanical engineers, I think, have an interesting challenge because they have to be a jack of all trades. I think that's kind of what this guy was trying to do in his cartoon, because there's just so many different things mechanical engineers are involved with. And they have to wear so many hats, right? Anyone knows what this is? Can you tell me what that is? It's a molecule, yes, but which one? Water. There we go, yes. The ionic bonds in water are critical to so much chemistry, right? It's incredible. Fluid dynamics going on here. And so if you will, so you can't explain your fundamentals, so what do? Well, pull it all together, right? This is freshman year through senior year, right? First year to last year, right? Because you want to do. So review all your relevant textbooks. I mean, it's a simple kind of thing. I've heard this quote too often. I would ask a technical question, and the answer I would get often, it's kind of like this, the deer in the headlights look is kind of like reactionary. It's kind of like that, it's like, you can't stop that from happening, right? So certain phrases get blurted out sometimes as an instinctual kind of thing, a writer's survival or something. And they say, well, I studied that in freshman year. And I will look at them and say, yes, you should have. What is the answer? Right? And it's just realized these were electrical engineers, couldn't tell me how to do parallel resistance. Okay? Parallel resistance is something that, yes, you do indeed learn that freshman year in physics, right? Probably. Maybe if it's late and you learn it in your sophomore year. But the point here is all of your classes are connected together. And I understand the challenge. The challenge is you go from semester to semester to semester to semester. The cool thing is it's supposed to all going to come together in senior design, right? And that's where you start using all of your skills to be able to demonstrate, yes, I got it. I know how to do this, right? And that's where we get excited as hiring managers. We want to know that you know your fundamentals. So when you don't know, this is why many career centers cannot help you with this. Right? They can't go back to all 4 years of your engineering education and help you figure out what's the most important thing. Right? That's where your professors come into play, though, in your textbooks, right? So go back and look at some of that stuff. Electronic engineering doesn't require an engineering training. That's what we used to call it. I forget what they call it. It's fundamentals of engineering. There's a professional engineering license and so on and so forth, right? I forget what the acronyms are these days. But in order to study for that, you really have to open up all your textbooks, right? Your technical interview is kind of like that first exam that you're going to take, but it's got consequences. Yeah, you can retake your technical exam for your professional engineers. You can't go back and redo a technical interview, right? Because once it's done, it's done. You're moving on. You're done with that company in most instances. So if you learn anything, I like this because it's a president from a university here. If you learn anything, please learn to ask for help. It is the sign of wisdom and strength, right? It's a sign of wisdom and strength. And I can't echo that any louder because that is exactly what the case is. So with that, it's all about getting over that technical bar, and that's the question that we're all asking ourselves as hiring managers. Are you over the technical bar, right? So knowing is not enough. I like this Bruce Lee concept. Knowing is not enough, you must apply, right? And willing is not enough, you must be able to do, right? So begin with the end in mind. You're hired. That's what you want to hear, right?
Yeah.
Right? You're hired. Here's the offer. That's what you're shooting for, right? If it is to be, it's up to me. I love that. And then, nobody knows who said this, but plan purposely. There's a lot of alliteration going on here. Prepare properly, proceed positively, and pursue persistently. So with that, what questions do you have? Yes.
What if you walk in expecting a technical interview and you are presented with a behavioral interview?
Well, that's a great question. Behavioral interviewing is something that a lot of hiring managers like to do. And so, one, I don't consider it bad to have studied and then get faced with a whole lot of non-technical questions because I'd rather be prepared. But you're right, behavioral questions are just as, I think, sometimes tricky to answer. And so that's where your Career Center comes into play because I think they can help you with a lot of the, well, I'll say the typical types of behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you had a tough team member on your team, and how did you handle that? How did you resolve some of that, right? So always have, so talk to your Career Center because they'll be able to give you a host of scenarios that a lot of hiring managers are going to be looking for, and then your job is to then say, be prepared to talk about that. This is a case where you could have 5 examples and you can use them for however many interviews you want, because I will hear that the fact that you answered that the same way in all your interviews, right? But yes, behavioral questions is very example specific, and that's where building your resume comes into play, right? Because when you can have, think about your resume because you should then be able to say, oh, while I was working on this project in this company, right? And then you pull something out of the behavioral interviewing bag to answer that question, right? So, but yeah, tell me about a time when is a classic set of questions. Anything else? I think I had till 4, so I'm doing good. We got time for questions. We got time for questions. Yes?
I'm an experienced employee out there, right?
Okay.
So one of the things that I think sometimes the new graduates ask is, what can the company do for me? Or I'm interested in this company because I want to be trained or whatever. They emphasize that, but one thing that the company want to hear is, what can you provide for the company? What kind of value do you bring to the company? So that would be that should probably be more stress from the person that.
Yes.
Like, what can I bring to make this company better? This is what I have experience with. This is what I can provide. This is what I can do for you. Not what you can do for me. But that's sort of like an instinct, I guess, that people have is to say, well, what can you do for me? That's why I want to work with you, because I want you to do something for me. But emphasize what you can do for them, right?
Exactly right. That's where researching the company comes into play, right? So when the way I guess I would ask that question is, what gets you excited about working for Keysight, right? What do you see, right? What is it you're bringing to the table, if you will, that makes me want to hire you, right? And so yes, I think that is a very appropriate question to ask, and everybody should be prepared to answer that question. And it only comes back to how well did you research that company to know what they're doing, what would get them excited about working there. But when you were asking that question, I was reminded of a whole nother set of questions that are really dumb questions to ask. Such like, well, would it be okay if I start work at noon? right? I mean, I've had that question, I'm telling you. How many weeks of vacation do I really get? Do I get about 6 or 7 per year, Yes, that might be of interest to you, but that's not what you ask in your interviews, right? Somewhere along the line, make sure that you get the job offer first, because those are the kinds of things that can lose it for you very, very quickly. A lot of times, and the other question that came to mind, or comment that I wanted to make that your question brings to mind is, tell me about your weaknesses. I personally think that's a silly question to have to answer, right? Because, I think it just puts you in a really awkward position, because nobody really wants to admit what their faults are, right? But I guess some of the best answers I've heard that just made me think, okay, because I'm not the one who asked it, but there are other interviewers that I've worked with over the years that ask that kind of question. And like I said, I personally dislike it quite a bit. But the best ways I've heard it answered are ways like, well, I recognize that Keysight Technologies does a lot with oscilloscopes. I don't know a lot about oscilloscopes. I've used them in the labs, but I have no idea how they're designed. I know that I want to learn how much more I'm going to do in that, right? And so for me, so the way I paraphrase that is, can you respond to what's your weaknesses with what your development objectives are as an engineer? I think that's a better way of answering it, right? Because, again, every hiring manager acknowledges the fact that you're not going to know everything. You know that. But when you can then maybe align what you don't know as a personal development objective for yourself in coming into the role, I think that's a better way of answering that. This will not be the way they want to answer, but that's the way I would answer it today.
I have kind of a hypothetical. Would it be looked down upon or be imperfect or professional or whatever if at the conclusion of the interview that you ask for direct feedback? Not whether or not you got the job right away, but it's like, what do you think of my interviewing skills? Where could I improve upon? Would that be looked upon as unprofessional or assumptive? What would you say?
Normally, I would say reserve that to the flush letter, so to speak. Save that kind of feedback for, well, what is it that you didn't hear? Kind of get that feedback after that. Because if you're really acing it, one of the challenges, one of the things I look for is confidence, right? You start asking me questions like that, I'm going to start questioning your confidence.
But even if it's at the conclusion?
I don't care when.
Okay.
Right? I don't care when.
And you said that would be the kind of question to ask after you got it.
Yeah, if you didn't get the job and you're getting that call, you say, I'm sorry, you're as a candidate, you didn't get it. That's a very appropriate place to ask that kind of question, right? But I wouldn't ask that as a matter of course at the end of your interviews, right? Confidence is one thing that, because not only did I have to hire these people, I also hired them and then worked with them for the first year out of school. And one of the things that I noticed is a huge challenge is a lot of people aren't confident. You guys are going to be less than confident than most people in any element of the workforce. You just haven't done enough, right, in most instances. So your confidence level is low. So that's an interesting thing. It's hard to hide, but it's something that you have to be able to project well. And can you be confident, right? And so that's why preparation is so huge, right? Preparation is huge. You don't want to be that guy going, oh.
I've heard several situations of this happening with past graduates in my field. I'm a physics major.
Okay.
Where they've been asked to actually complete a task, like assemble a vacuum chamber, or there'll be a group interview, and as a team, they have to complete like a really short-term project, like hands-on stuff like that. Do you have those situations in your field as well?
I know of them, and I personally I haven't conducted things like that. And so I think what a lot of people are getting at in that context is part of it is driven by how much experience you might have had, but also how you think, right? How do you think? How do you approach a problem, right? And that's important, again. And that's tough because there's, in a lot of cases, no right answer or wrong answer to that. It's who you are and how you approach a problem. And so I think in a lot of cases, it's like how many gas stations are there in the United States? right? It's those kinds of thought problems, when people ask those questions, they're trying to get to, how do you approach a problem? How do you solve that problem now? And so, I know within Keysight, especially in our sales organization, we asked you to do, as part of our interview, a technical presentation. I think a lot of schools today are doing a pretty good job of forcing you guys, maybe, that to do technical presentations. Well, that's just as important. Dan, my partner in the back there, just informed me that we're looking for a salesperson here in the Dallas area. Right? So if you're an outgoing kind of person, I studied engineering. I did engineering for a bunch of years, but I like working with people, if you can't figure that part out. And I love talking to people, right? And so if you're that kind of person, then we've got a job for you. So come do a technical interview, because by now you should be able to answer it. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
When is it appropriate to talk about salary?
When is it appropriate to talk about salary? That's a great question. I won't say never.
You're asking a lot of applications, what's your expected?
Yes, I know. And my daughter went through that recently and a couple of times now. And, I think it's important for you to understand what the ranges are for the job that you're applying for, right? And does that meet your expectations? But, I often try and say, because it's meant to filter you out. And, as a hiring manager, I want you to know that that's the range that I'm going to be hiring you for. Hopefully that fits your expectations. But when I hear it coming from other people, a lot of times it's just meant to filter you out. Oh, you want too much money. I don't care how much skill that you want. I think that's the wrong kind of question to be asking personally, right? But you kind of have to answer it if they ask you, right? So, maybe and again, I'm going to give you what I think might be the right answer, right? Some of this is ultimately experimentation, but you can say, hey, out of my career center, because career centers can tell you this. They say expectations for a college hire coming from our college is $65K to $75K. It's kind of like my ballpark, right? Leave it at that. Get the data from your career center, because they've got that data, right?
So do you think like pulling the data off of something like Glassdoor for new hires for entry-level position in such and such area is also okay?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, probably. And again, it kind of suggests that you've maybe researched the company a little bit, right? So. But some of these questions, like I said, I want to, maybe I'm unique this way, I don't know, I don't think so. But I want to know the value that you're bringing to the company, the skills that you're bringing to the company, and as a company representative, I'm willing to pay what those skills represent, right? And that, I think, is what the hiring manager's job is really all about. Is when I pay you a salary, if I'm going to pay you $75K a year, I want to know that that value is coming back to Keysight Technologies, right? With the skills that you're bringing, right? For you to come back and say, well, I expect to make $75K and I was only willing to pay $55, those are the wrong kinds of things to, I think, because those tend to be limiting in my book. Any other questions? I like these questions. They're typical, by the way, because I think that, unfortunately, you're going to face them somewhere along the line. What I don't ever want is you guys to be losing because of the technical interview. So there are no secrets to success. It is a result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Hopefully you don't have too much failure to have to therefore learn. But like I said, that I haven't done this technical workshop without some students coming up to me after the fact and said, I wish I had it last week. Right? It's been my observation that most people get ahead during the time that others waste. I like that quote too, because we all love our social lives, but there are times when that social life might have to be put off to the side in preparation for something more important. Right? A person who is successful has simply formed the habit, coming back to the 7 habits concepts, of doing things that unsuccessful people will not do. Maybe I got one or two more. Do a little more each day than you think you possibly can. I just like that because I remember my daughter and I, she was only, I don't know, maybe 9 years old, and we're walking down this dirt road. And I don't know what prompted me to do this. I asked her, I said, hey, we picked up a stone each, and I said, how far do you think you could throw that stone? And she goes, well, I think I could throw it to that tree over there. I said, well, you know what? That's great. I think that would be fantastic if you could do that. But you know what? See that tree over there, which was probably another 10 yards down the way? You could throw it past that tree. And at first she goes, I don't know, but I'll try. She threw it past that tree, right? So the key is, I think as people have a tendency to underestimate ourselves, right? So always do a little more each day, and you might surprise yourself. With that, that's all I got. So thank you.